So I'm really glad to share our experience and our joint journey that we had with Sirocco and specifically with Scout. Just to quickly introduce myself, I'm as Sam highlighted, I'm one of the EY alumni. So I was starting my career actually at EY, and then soon moved into supply chain in different industries. I worked in retail, I worked in pharma, I worked in consumers, I worked in agriculture business. And since 5 years, I have built different automation programs at Bayer across different divisions, but also worked closely together with Sirocco as one of the first deployments we've done back in the days in Switzerland. What I'm passionate about is really how technology can drive business outcomes. And through that journey with Sirocco, it was always a co-creation and a mental brainstorming how we can use technology to make more visibility, to get better insights that can be actionable, right? Not just getting the insights and report them out, but really actionable insights. So today I'm going to show you basically 3 use cases. One is how we were basically having certain challenges after post-merge integration when Bayer acquired Monsanto. We look into how our row crops team in planning to use or not use the systems of records, as well as at the end of the presentation, I will share a bit how we are increasing our customer experience through process standardization and automation. First use case, what we were looking at our 2018 when Bayer was acquiring Monsanto, we had actually 2 organizations that were doing business, right? Across supply chain, you can imagine that this is quite a challenge because you actually want to deliver the customer with all the products that you have, but you have different ways of working. You have different systems, different processes, different physical supply chains. So for us, it was really one of the key challenges is really to look into how can we bring those 2 worlds together. So some of the challenges we were actually seeing was basically that we had a lot of processes that were documented or not documented that were just done in a way that it was growing over the years. We had different teams, but also applications mayhem. So we have more than 3,000 applications that are used where we even don't know, if that's really something that we still need. We had a lot of overlapping systems, dispersed data. So you can imagine if you bring 2 huge companies together, you see that you have still the legacy systems and the legacy data sets, but they need to be somehow integrated and made visible. There is also a strong change fatigue, and we had a lot of people that were joining the company, but also leaving. So there was a lot of challenges, specifically in the years 2020, 2022, not to mention the pandemic of COVID. So that was really one of our business challenges that we said, okay, we might have a business continuity that was under threat. So why we use Scout is actually to identify first and have a better understanding of cause and effect of our end-to-end processes. Where do they start? Where do they end? Who is involved? What applications? What teams? How many transactions? How many applications we are using? So that we can also document our processes in the new reality. But that also helped us, as Sam mentioned earlier, to identify where does process optimization make sense, and also where do we have automation potentials, just looking at the as-is. So what we've done, and some of the outcomes in Bayer North America product supply business, we were identifying a set of opportunities. So we identified RPA opportunities, right? So there's a lot of potential, like we're talking here about 20, 30,000 hours per year that we can actually automate only by doing RPA. We also identified, okay, we need to rewrite and redesign our best practices and our SOPs, specifically the trainings, right, to train our employees. It is not just about automation. It is about training. It is about raising the awareness. It is about education. We had an optimization and a standardization landscape that we were able to build, and it helped us as well to enhance certain systems because we saw the same transaction in different organizations were used for different purposes. So why not learning from each other and seeing that to generate a certain outcome, you have to do certain system enhancements, but always with the big picture in mind to look into how can we achieve a higher standardization, harmonization, but also then automating. But also it's alternate solutions. I was joining the earlier session when I think it was James when he was explaining that there is a lot of different applications when we talk automation, right? And this is also what we identified. We said there is not just one technology that we can use, but there is a set of technology. There is a technology stack that we can use fit for purpose. So sometimes a dashboard is much more meaningful and much better than automating a poor process with Excel and PowerPoint through an RPA. So these were all the insights that we were getting so that we can streamline on one hand our application landscape, simplify and harmonize our procedures, and then ultimately use the right technology to automate it so that we can enhance the employee experience as well in our organization. And Scout was actually giving us the foundations and giving us the baseline, as Sam has shared it before, to basically look into those different data sets and different purposes that we were actually identifying through this data. The next use case was actually in planning. So as part of the agriculture, we do have Bayer as one of the leaders in agriculture business. We do have a huge business with row crops, so corn and oilseed rape. And our planning team, it's nature, right? So it is easier to plan in a chemical environment where you can control to some extent, but planning in nature is much, much more difficult. So what we saw is that due to the uncertainties, due to the situation we also had with COVID, people were fragmented, they were working at home. We were not having so much, let's say, interaction, and we had a lot of workload. And this resulted in one of the all-time lows in our employee voice of employee surveys that we were doing. So really complaining about high workload. We are spending a lot of time and on screen. We also saw that we have a lot of duplication of efforts across multiple spreadsheets and systems. And we just felt like when you talk to the planner, he would say, well, I feel we are just doing the same thing over and over again. But we were not able to quantify that. We were not able to measure that, right? Because it's not visible. You don't have a data log of Excel. You don't have a data log of Teams, how much time you spend on Teams. We don't have a data set that can look into, is the process executed in a standard way or not? When you talk to the people, they will say, well, I'm supposed to do the process in this way. Or when you get a training, how you get onboarded in a new team, they will say, look, this is how you should be doing the process. But now I show you how you actually have to do it, right? So this is what also gives us an insight of, well, there is a certain set of data that is not giving us what we need in terms of process improvement and automation potentials. We were scouting. We said, okay, let's do scouting. We also wanted to identify what are our opportunities because we have to switch from one planning tool to another because, we have now one of these once in a career lifetime opportunity to implement a new planning tool. So from demand planning all the way down to production and detailed scheduling. So we were selecting a small team, about 20 users in 9 locations across Europe and Africa. And we were identifying about 19 to 20 processes. And one of the stunning, let's say, insights were really that our teams were spending about 90% of their day in Excel, toggling taxes and sharing and searching for data. And toggling is, if you do an application switch with Alt-Tab. So this is the time when we say, how often do we do toggle? How often do we switch the screen and the application on the screen? And only 1% in SAP. So as a supply chain organization, you would be recognized in an organization that will say, if you talk with, commercial, sales, R&D, finance, and supply chain, they will say, okay, supply chain is SAP. It's a transactional world, right? They're mainly working in SAP. And now we see that when we look into data and in the screen time and how much we really spend time on different applications, we see it's only 1%. I give an example. We have this European availability report, 8 Excel files, and about 950 days spent per year in the team in these 8 Excel files. That's one of the use cases where we say, okay, now this makes sense because we have an ROI, 950 days. We want to understand what's the root cause. So we use Scout to do the upstream scouting to identify users and to identify the root causes. We then can do a consolidation of reporting because we say, in order to generate this output, what are the things that you need to do to generate it, right? So think differently, think outcome-based, think what is the outcome that you want to achieve, and not what's the input you give in and let's automate it, right? On the other side, on the long term, right, we are talking about adopting to a new planning system. We also want to have a better integration of data between the different systems. But now we see where do we have which data sources, how are they fragmented, how they're unstructured, and how can we use this data to better prepare for a new planning system. Or what we also do now is how do we use this data of Scout and the work graph to prepare for the S/4HANA implementation, right? Because we have a huge opportunity here to Scout at scale to identify all these opportunities. The third success story is one of my favorites. It is the customer service team in Europe and in APAC. You can imagine that one company had more centralized customer service organization, so very regional, and central. And the other legacy company was more country oriented, so very close to the customer. Local languages were spoken, but then you can imagine that the procedures were completely country customized, right? So it was not having that standard way of interacting with the customers. That was also reflected when we did Scout, because we saw we have a high process complexity and a very high workload. So when we looked at Scout in the first time, so we did it in 2021, the first time before we actually did a target operating model change. So we identified that about 26% of the working time was spent in teams. So it's customer service. They should be spending most of the time with the customers, but actually they were spending a quarter of the day or a quarter of the year in teams. So chatting with each other, searching files and so on and so forth. We identified that about 8,500 hours per year were just toggling. That's about 5 to 6 FTs, depending on what baseline you take. So we pay 5 to 6 people in customer service that do nothing else than just toggling, switching applications on the screen. Of course, if you have a team that is 200 or 300 people big, that makes a difference. And we spend about 23,000 hours per year on tasks. So these tasks, they are not necessarily linked to a procedure or a process. It is really something that happens here and there. It's a fragmentation. It's a task hotspot. It looks like an activity. It looks like a process, but it's not part of the core process, because we do know what are our core processes. So we had a lot of challenges, like we don't have visibility in the end-to-end procedures. We have a lot of inconsistent processes. And what we were identifying with Scout, as I mentioned, we've done more than 98 procedures, more than 7 business functions. We have quantified inefficiencies, including all the residual efforts as well as the toggling. And we already have automated more than 35,000 hours in Europe and in APAC through automation. So here, what you see as well, we've done in 21, the first scouting, we saw all the mess, we saw all the complexity, and now we are in a much better shape. We are now in a much better position when we're looking into where do we do work, where does work happen, and how do we actually interact with our technology. And what I'm most proud of is we are now using technology for continuous improvement. So it's not just I do an initiative here and there, I do a lean, black belt project or a green belt project here and there. It's more like we're using technology to enable a continuous improvement through data. So that was basically it, based on my 3, let's say, use cases. So just to sum up, when we talk about lighting up the dark side of the moon at Bayer, we're using Scout since 2018. We have deployed it across 40 countries. We are especially proud that we were able to do Scout as well in countries with a very strong data protection and data privacy law, such as France and Germany, where you also have works councils. So we are able to do that as well in those countries. We've mapped more than 500 procedures. We have more than 1,000 colleagues. And as you see here, we did standardization, application optimization. We have enhanced our employee experience, the customer experience, and also automation. So our ROI, it is quite good. So we have more than 100 million ROI that we have identified through the data sets with Scout, and the journey is continuing.